The rain hit Reed Street like it had somewhere to be. Inside Wade's corner, one yellow light. 3 booths, a pie case nobody was looking at, and a woman in a red dress who had no business being there. She sat down anyway, not at the empty booth by the door, not at the one with the good view of the window. She walked straight to the back, pulled out an envelope, old paper, worn soft at the corners from years of being held by hands that couldn't let go. Across the counter, a man wiped a glass and said nothing. He didn't know her name. She didn't know his. But somewhere inside, that envelope was the reason she could see it all. And somewhere behind, that counter was the man who had been sending money to a stranger for 23 years without ever once signing his name. Neither of them knew it yet. The bell above the door rang, and everything was about to change. The rain came down hard that Friday night. Not the gentle kind. Not the kind that softens edges and makes everything look like a painting. This was Georgia rain, the kind that means business. The kind that hits the asphalt and bounces back up like it's angry about something. Caldwell, Georgia had exactly 1 traffic light, 2 gas stations, and a diner on the corner of Reed and Fifth that had been there longer than anyone could remember. Wade's corner. The sign out front had a busted letter D, so it read WAE's corner, and nobody had fixed it in 4 years, and nobody planned to. Inside, the light was yellow. Always yellow. The kind of light that made everything look warmer than it was. 3 booths along the left wall. 6 stools at the counter. A pie case with 2 slices of sweet potato left and 1 sad-looking lemon icebox that wasn't going to make it to morning. Beverly Wade sat at the corner table near the window, 70 years old, and not one of those 70 years had made her quiet. She had her knitting in her lap. Burgundy yarn tonight. Something she'd been working on for 3 weeks and refused to explain to anyone. Her eyes moved the way water moves, slow on the surface, everything underneath. Her son was behind the counter. Everett Wade, 41, broad shoulders from years of lifting produce crates before the sun came up. Hands that had been through things. A scar on the left thumb from a broken glass when he was 19. A burn mark near the wrist, old now, faded to the color of memory. He was wiping down the counter with a blue cloth when the door opened. The bell above the door rang. He didn't look up right away. That was the thing about Everett. He didn't rush toward anything. She came in like weather. That was the only way to describe it. Like weather that hadn't been in the forecast. Camille Reeves, 38 years old, 5'9", without the heels, which she was absolutely wearing. Black stilettos that had no business being on Reed Street in a rainstorm. She wore a dress the color of stop signs. Silk, wrapped and gathered at the waist, cut to a diagonal hem, just below the knee, a slit on the right side, that made the whole room rethink what it was doing. Her skin was deep brown and flawless in the yellow light. Cheekbones that looked like someone had made a decision about them. Lips full, mouth set in a straight line that said she was used to being listened to. Her hair was pulled back in a sleek low bun, not one strand out of place despite the rain, despite the wind, despite whatever had clearly just happened in the parking lot, because her left shoulder was wet. Just the left one. The right side had been protected by something. A bag, maybe, or a companion. The companion appeared 11 seconds later. Roland Okafor, 52, dark suit, gray at the temples, phone pressed to his ear like it was load-bearing. He stepped through the door, already talking to someone who wasn't in the room. He scanned the diner in under 2 seconds, and his entire face said, "This is not where we are supposed to be." Camille didn't look at him. She was already looking at the room. Not the way a person looks when they want something. The way a person looks when they're tired of wanting things in the right places. She looked at the yellow light. She looked at the counter with its cracked linoleum edge and the small handwritten menu on the chalkboard. She looked at the 2 slices of sweet potato pie. She looked at the old woman in the corner with the burgundy yarn. Then she walked to the corner booth. Not the booth nearest the door. Not the empty middle booth with a good view of the window. She walked to the one right next to Beverly Wade and sat down. Roland lowered his phone 3 inches. He made a face at the back of her head. She didn't see it. She was already unclipping her earring from her right ear, setting it on the table, rolling her neck once to the left. Beverly Wade watched all of this without moving her knitting needles. Then she went back to the yarn. Everett came around the counter. He moved the way he always moved. No pity, no performance. He got to the table and looked at Camille the way a man looks at a guest, not at a presence. "What can I get you?" Camille looked up. This was the first time they looked at each other directly. It lasted maybe 3 seconds. He didn't recognize her, which meant he hadn't Googled her. Which meant he either didn't know who she was or didn't care. Either one was unusual. Either one was interesting. She said, "What's still good?" Not what's on the menu. What's still good? That was a different question. Everett said, "Sweet potato pie. Coffee. Cornbread if you want something that'll stay with you." The cornbread. Anything else? Coffee. Black. He wrote nothing down. He didn't need to. Roland had sat himself in the booth across the aisle. He ordered whatever was fastest and went back to his phone. His voice carried low and controlled through the diner, the kind of voice used to managing rooms without raising itself. Beverly's needles clicked. The rain hit the window. Everett brought the coffee first. He set it down, without ceremony, the way you set something down when you intend for it to be useful. Camille wrapped both hands around the mug, not because she was cold. She had an overcoat on the seat beside her. She wrapped her hands around the mug the way people do when they need something steady. Beverly Wade noticed. She noticed everything. Outside, through the blurred window, headlights moved slow on the wet street. The gala was 12 minutes away. Roland had confirmed this to Camille in the car 4 times. Confirmed the parking situation, the media pool, the front row seating configuration, the fact that they were already 7 minutes behind where they should be, and he needed her to think about the image they were putting forward when they walked in. She had looked out the car window the whole ride. When the car slowed for a red light, and she saw the glow of the diner sign, through the rain, she said, "Stop here." Roland had said, "We're going to be late." She had already opened the door. The cornbread came. Everett set it on the table and stepped back. He didn't hover. He had work to do, and he went back to do it. Camille ate one small piece. Slowly. She was not a woman who ate slowly as a rule. Eating slowly was a skill she'd had to learn at 35, when her doctor told her her heart rate at rest was the same as most people's during exercise, and maybe she should consider the concept of stopping. She was considering it now. Her eyes drifted to the chalkboard menu. Wade's Corner. 1987. She read it, without reading it, the way the mind processes background. Vous avez vade. That was what the license above the kitchen door said. A business license, the kind local counties made you put up in food service establishments. W. She looked at it a second longer than she meant to. Then she looked at her coffee. Then she reached into the bag she'd set beside her on the seat. The leather bag. The one Roland had looked at twice tonight because it was not her usual bag. Not the structure Bottega she carried to every public event. This one was older, softer. The handles had been repaired once. A thin strip of darker leather threaded through where the original stitching had failed. She took out an envelope. Not new, not crisp. The kind of envelope that had been opened and closed so many times the flap no longer held, the corners going soft and round the way old paper does when it's been handled by hands that care about it. Inside were 8 letters and a stack of receipts. She didn't take them out. She just held the envelope on the table in front of her, her thumb running along the edge. Beverly Wade looked up from her knitting. She didn't say anything. She just looked. Camille didn't notice, because she was inside herself now. 23 years back. Back to a 2-room apartment in a 3-story walk-up building, with a radiator knocked all night, and the window in the bathroom had a crack sealed with electrical tape. She'd been 15 the first time the letter came. She remembered standing in the hallway of the building holding it because the mailbox had no lock, and she didn't like leaving anything there. She remembered opening it over the kitchen sink because she didn't want to drop it. She remembered the way the paper felt. Thin, but not cheap. Like whoever had typed it had thought about what they were putting their words on. The letter had been short. 6 sentences. It said the Ridgefield Education Support Fund had received a contribution designated for her account, covering the remainder of her second semester and a portion of the medical procedure scheduled for March. It said the contributor wished to remain anonymous. It said the contributor had included a personal note. The note had been typed on a separate piece of paper. Keep reading. The world will need what you see. That was all. No signature. No name. Just two initials at the bottom. Evu. She had been 17 when the vision in her left eye started to clear. After the surgery. After the second surgery. After the 3 months of adjustments and the pair of glasses, that cost more than her entire spring wardrobe. She had stood in a parking lot one afternoon and read a billboard from half a block away and cried. Not pretty crying, the kind that comes from somewhere so deep you don't know it was sitting there until it needs to get out. She had thought about EW on that day. She had thought about EW on graduation day, on the day she closed her first funding round, on the day the Wall Street Journal put her on the cover, on the day she sat in the back of a car in Atlanta traffic looking at her phone and realized she had more money than she knew what to do with, and she still hadn't found the person who had sent those letters. She had hired 2 investigators over 7 years. Both of them had come back with the same wall. The Ridgefield Fund had merged, then closed, then its records had gone to a storage facility in central Georgia that had a flood in 2018 and lost approximately 30% of its paper files. The remaining records mentioned a contributor identified only by initials. No address, no contact information, no paper trail that went anywhere useful. And then her assistant had found the handwritten ledger, an actual paper ledger. From 1999, from the original Ridgefield office. It had been in a box that a former administrator named Mrs. Thelma Briggs had taken home when the office closed, meaning to return it, and never quite getting around to it. Mrs. Briggs's granddaughter had found it during an estate sale 2 years ago and hadn't known what to do with it. So she put in a box with some other papers and listed the box on an online marketplace for $8. Camille's assistant had bought it for $8 in priority overnight shipping. The ledger had entries in 4 different handwriting styles, small, cramped notations from someone who had been writing a lot for a long time. The entries spanned 6 years. Most contributors were listed with partial information, but in the right-hand column of the November 1999 page, in handwriting that was neat and unhurried and slightly tilted to the right, someone had written E. Wade, Caldwell, G.A., Caldwell, Georgia. Population 11,408. 1 traffic light, 2 gas stations, and a diner on the corner of Reed and 5th. Camille had not told Roland this was why she wanted to host the Reeves Ed Gala in Caldwell this year. She had let him believe it was about community outreach strategy. He had believed her because it made sense, because she had said it in a tone that invited no follow-up, and because Roland Okafor had worked with her for 9 years and understood there were doors he didn't knock on. She hadn't known what she would find. She hadn't planned to stop at this diner. She had planned to arrive at the gala, give her remarks, do the photographs, thank the local officials, and go to bed in her hotel room and lie awake thinking about whether she was chasing something that was going to leave her exactly the same. Then the rain came down, and her driver slowed for a red light, and she saw the sign, Wade's Corner, and she said stop. Now she sat here with both hands around a coffee cup and an envelope she couldn't stop touching. Roland appeared at her elbow. Camille. He kept his voice low. We have 11 minutes. We're already behind the timeline, and Councilman Barnes is the kind of man who takes being kept waiting as a character assessment. He can assess. That's not productive. Hold on. He stopped. Sit down or go wait in the car. He stood for 3 more seconds to register that he was making a choice, and then he walked back to his booth. Everett had come back around to check on the tables. He moved through the small room with the ease of a man who had been in this space so long it had taken the shape of him, or he had taken the shape of it. He topped off the coffee of the man at the counter without being asked. He exchanged 4 words with the couple near the window. He picked up an empty mug from the table by the door. He came to Camille's table last. He looked at the envelope. He didn't ask about it. He looked at it the way a man looks at something he's going to give the dignity of not commenting on. More coffee, Camille said, in a minute. Then, before she decided she was going to say anything, she said, I'm looking for someone. Everett set the coffee pot down on the edge of the table. Not impatient, not leaning in, just settling. Someone in Caldwell. Maybe. Someone whose initials are EW. She paused. They helped me a long time ago. I've been trying to find them. The diner was quiet enough that the rain was the loudest thing in the room. A fork scraped a plate at the counter. The pie case hummed. Everett said, "That's a pretty common set of initials." "I know. You've been looking long?" "7 years." He didn't react to that. Not with surprise, not with sympathy. He just let it sit there the way you let something sit when it deserves room. "Must be important," he said. "They changed my life." She said it the way people say things they've said in their heads. So many times the words have worn smooth. Not emotional, just precise. "I was 17. I couldn't see properly. I didn't have money to fix it. Somebody paid for the surgery and paid my tuition and sent me a letter and never left a name." Everett's face gave nothing, which was not nothing. A man's face giving nothing in a moment like this is a choice. "You find them," he said. "What are you going to do?" Camille blinked. Nobody had asked her that in 7 years. The investigators had never asked. Roland had never asked. She had never asked herself, not directly, not in those exact words. "I don't know," she said, and that was also true. Everett picked up the coffee pot. "Well," he said, "I hope you find them." He walked back to the counter. Beverly Wade's needles had stopped moving. She was looking at the envelope in Camille's hands. Camille didn't notice. She was looking at the business license above the kitchen door again. The way the yellow light caught the laminate frame. Vous avez vade. Et vous. The thought moved through her like cold water. She pressed it back down. Because it was too small. Because it was too obvious. Because the person she had imagined for 23 years had been someone older, someone with means, a retired professional, or a community elder, or someone whose circumstances made the giving make sense. Not a man her age running a diner in a town with a busted sign. Not someone who looked like he might be counting his own expenses at the end of every night. She tucked the envelope back in her bag. She picked up the coffee. Roland came back. "Camille, we need to go." She didn't move immediately. She looked at the window. The rain was still coming. The street outside was empty except for the light moving on the wet asphalt. "Did you pay?" she asked. Roland produced his card. He always had his card. Camille pulled out cash from the inner zip of her bag and set it on the table. Twice what the meal cost. She didn't make a moment of it. She set it under the edge of the mug and stood. She put her coat on. She picked up her bag. She paused. She didn't know why she paused. She looked at Everett behind the counter. He was rinsing a glass. He looked up because he felt her looking the way people feel that. She said, "The cornbread was good." He said, "Come back sometime." Not a sales pitch. Not charm, just an honest statement offered, without any particular hope attached to it. She walked out. The bell above the door rang again. The rain swallowed them both. Beverly Wade sat in her chair for a long moment after the door closed. The burgundy yarn sat still in her lap. Her needles were quiet. She was looking at the table where the woman in the red dress had sat, looking at the spot where the envelope had been. She turned her head slowly toward the kitchen. Everett was back at the sink. Beverly said, quietly, in the particular way she said things she had waited a long time to say, "Did you see her?" Everett turned off the water. He didn't look up. "She was a customer, Mama." Beverly said, which in Beverly Wade's language meant she was not finished. She was simply waiting for the right sentence. She said she had letters. Everett dried his hands on the towel hanging from the oven handle. "Lots of people carry letters." Beverly said, "Not like those." She paused. "I saw the paper." "I know that paper, baby. I used to buy it for you at the office supply on Chestnut. You used to go through a whole pack every few months." She paused again. "For about 23 years. The diner was very quiet. The couple near the window was gathering their coats. The man at the counter had left. The hum of the pie case and the rain on the roof were the only sounds. Everett stood at the sink with the towel in his hands. Beverly said, "I never asked you why." Her voice was not accusatory. It was not sentimental. It was just even the way true things are even. "I saw you counting change on the kitchen table every month for more years than I can number. I never asked, because I knew why." She looked at her yarn. Renee knew, too. She just knew it differently. Everett said nothing. Beverly picked up her knitting. She said, "That woman was looking for you." Everett hung the towel back on the handle. He turned around and looked at his mother. She wasn't looking for me, he said. She was looking for EW. Beverly looked at him over the top of her glasses with the specific expression she reserved for moments when she was choosing not to argue with something that didn't need arguing with. She went back to her knitting. Everett turned off the light above the sink. Outside, in the parking lot, a black SUV sat running. Through the rain-blurred rear window, a shape that might have been a woman in a red dress sat very still for a long moment before the car finally moved. In the front seat, Roland Okafor had his phone in both hands. His thumbs were moving. He had a photograph on his screen. He had taken it when Camille set the envelope on the table and turned to look out the window. It was a clear shot, clear enough. The top receipt in the envelope, the one that had slipped half out of the fold. Clear enough to read the amount, the fund name, the contributor initials. Clear enough to type into a search bar. Rolantiped, Wade's Corner, Caldwell, Georgia. Everett Wade, proprietor. He looked at the result for a long moment. Then he made a call. I need everything you can find on a man named Everett Wade, he said. Caldwell, Georgia. Financial history, property records, anything outstanding. I need it by morning. He hung up. The SUV pulled out onto Reed Street. The rain kept coming. Inside Wade's Corner, Everett locked the front door and turned the sign to closed. He moved through the quiet room. He wiped the last 2 tables. He covered the pie case. He turned off the overhead lights and left only the low lamp above the counter. He went to the kitchen. He stood at the counter for a moment. Then he opened the bottom drawer, the one next to the reach and cooler, the one that stuck a little and you had to lift the handle before you pulled. Inside was a stack of papers, envelopes, bundled with a rubber band that had been replaced twice over the years. Receipts, each one folded in thirds and kept in the order they were sent. A small notebook where he'd kept track of the dates and amounts because Renee had said always keep track. You'll want to know the whole number someday. He had not looked at these papers in 8 months. He looked at them now. He put his hand on the stack. He didn't take anything out. He stood there in the low light of the kitchen with the rain outside and his mother's footsteps on the stairs up to the apartment and the smell of coffee and cornbread still in the air. He closed the drawer. He turned off the kitchen light. He went upstairs. He did not sleep well that night, but that was not new. Saturday came in gray, the kind of gray that sits on a town like a hand-pressed flat over everything. No rain yet, just the threat of it, just the sky making a decision it hadn't committed to. Caldwell woke up the way small towns do, slow and certain. The gas station on 5th opened at 6. The barbershop on Reed didn't open until 9, but Jerome unlocked the door at 8:30 because there was always somebody waiting. The elementary school on Maple had its Saturday tutoring program, cars pulling in and out of the lot with the quiet efficiency of people who had somewhere to be and not enough time to get there comfortably. Wade's Corner opened at 7. It always opened at 7. Everett had been there since 5:45. That was the thing about owning a place like this. The opening time on the sign was for customers. Your actual opening time was whatever hour the prep work required, and the prep work didn't care about your sleep. He had made the cornbread first, then the biscuits, then the grits, low and slow, stirring every few minutes with a long-handled spoon Renee had bought at a yard sale 14 years ago because she said it was the right weight for stirring. He had never replaced it. He had never felt the need. Beverly came down at 7:10. She sat at her corner table. She did not make conversation in the morning. She drank her coffee and read her devotional, and that was the morning, and it had been the morning for as long as he could remember. By 8 o'clock, the diner had 4 customers. By 9, it had 7. By 9:40, it had Roland Okafor. He didn't come in like a customer. He came in like a man who had already decided something and was here to deliver the conclusion. Dark suit again, different tie, a folder tucked under one arm, slim and brown. He stood at the door for a moment, scanning the room with the eyes of someone assessing a location before a meeting. Found Everett behind the counter, walked to the counter, sat on the stool at the far end, away from the other customers. Everett looked up. Coffee, he said. Roland said, sure. Everett poured it. Sat on the counter. Went back to the grill, where 2 orders of eggs were going. Roland did not drink the coffee. He opened the folder and laid it on the counter, turned so Everett could read it without picking it up. Everett flipped the eggs. He did not look at the folder. Roland said, "I know who you are." Everett said nothing. "E.W., Roland said, 23 years of contributions to the Ridgefield Education Support Fund. We traced it from the ledger. It took my people about 4 hours." He paused. Should have been harder to find, but the ledger was specific. Everett plated the eggs. He slid them across the pass, threw for Beverly to take to table 2, because Beverly helped on Saturday mornings and had for 11 years, and that was not a subject of discussion, it was just true. He turned around and looked at Roland. Not a long look, just enough to see what kind of man he was looking at. He'd gotten good at that. Years of a diner will do it. People sit at your counter, and they tell you who they are before they open their mouths. Roland was the kind of man who was always managing something. He looked at a room and saw pieces to be moved. Not malicious. Worse than malicious. Practical. The kind of practical that has no room for anything it can't quantify. "What can I get you to eat?" Everett said. "Hold on, blanked. I'm not here to eat." "Then you're sitting at a counter in a restaurant for another reason." Everett turned to wipe down the grill. "I don't really have those." Roland looked at the back of his head for a moment. Recalibrating. "Mr. Wade." He kept his voice low enough that the other customers couldn't hear. "I came here to be direct with you because I think you'd prefer that. So here it is. Camille Reeves does not need to know who you are. The story she's been telling herself for 23 years is about someone larger than life. Someone who doesn't have outstanding tax liens on a small business in a town most people have never heard of." Everett turned the water off. He dried his hands. He turned around and looked at Roland Okafor for the second time. This time the look lasted longer. Roland kept going. "What I'm saying is the version of E.W. she's been looking for is not going to fit. And when things don't fit, people get disappointed. And when Camille Reeves gets disappointed publicly, that's a problem for her foundation, her donors, and the work she's been doing for 15 years. He opened the folder further, slid a piece of paper across the counter. "So I'm proposing something simple." Everett looked at the paper. It was a check. The number on it was not a small number. "You take that," Roland said. "You get current on your taxes. You fix whatever else needs fixing. Camille leaves Caldwell with a story about an anonymous contributor who couldn't be found, which is a story she already knows how to tell." Everybody moves forward. The diner hummed around them. Plate scraped. Someone at table 1 asked Beverly for more hot sauce. The pie case word. Everett looked at the check for a long time. Then he picked it up. Roland let out a small breath. The breath of a man who has done this before and knows the moment it tips. Everett looked at the check closely, looked at the number, looked at the name of Roland's company at the top, looked at the signature line. Then he set it back down on the counter and slid it back across to Roland. Not fast, not dramatic. The way you return something to someone, that was never yours. "Get something to eat or head out," Everett said. "Either one's fine." Roland stared at the check. He stared at Everett. "You understand what I'm offering you." "I understood it before you finished the sentence." "Then you understand it's a reasonable." "Hold on." First time Everett had used his name. Quiet. Flat. Like a door, closing gently but firmly. "I'm not going to take your money. I'm not going to stay away from someone I haven't gone near. And I'm going to need this stool for paying customers in about 10 minutes because Saturday gets busy." He picked up the coffee pot. "So." Roland sat for 3 more seconds, long enough to let Everett know he was choosing to leave, not being dismissed. Then he took the check, closed the folder, stood up, and walked out. The bell above the door rang. Beverly appeared at the counter pass, through with 2 empty plates. She set them down. She looked at the door Roland had just walked through. She looked at Everett. She said nothing, but her eyes said, "I heard everything." Everett said, "Don't." Beverly said, "I didn't say a word. You were about to." "I was about to ask for a refill." She held out her mug. He poured the coffee. She went back to her tables. The morning moved the way mornings move when something is sitting underneath them. The customers came and went. The food went out. The dishes came back. The register opened and closed. Everything normal on the surface and everything not normal underneath. By 11, the breakfast crowd had thinned. Everett was in the kitchen when the door opened again. He didn't hear it over the vent. Beverly came to the kitchen door. "You've got someone." He looked up. "Who?" She made the particular face she made when she was not going to describe something because the description would not do it justice. He came out. Darnell Osei was sitting at the counter. 45 years old, built like he had played ball in college, and then spent 20 years in office chairs and was currently at war with the second half of that description. Close-cropped hair, suit jacket, no tie, top button open, which for Darnell was the equivalent of showing up in sweatpants. He had driven from Atlanta. The drive was 2.5 hours. Beverly had texted him Friday night after the diner closed, just 3 words, "Something is happening." And he had been on the road by 6 in the morning without needing more than that. His face said everything. "Hey," Everett said. Darnell said, "Don't hang me." Everett went behind the counter, poured 2 coffees without being asked, set one in front of Darnell. Darnell said, "You want to tell me why there's a post going around the Caldwell community group saying that the man running the diner on Reed Street is trying to get close to Camille Reeves for personal gain?" Everett looked at his coffee. Who posted it? Account with no profile picture and no post history, which means it was made for the purpose. Darnell put his phone on the counter. The screen showed the post. 53 comments. Some people are defending you. Some people are staying quiet. And some people are saying where there's smoke. Everett read the post once. He set the phone back down. "It'll pass," he said. Darnell looked at him for a long time. The kind of look that comes from 30 years of knowing someone. The kind of look that has run out of patience for a particular brand of stubbornness. "Ave." He kept his voice low. "She's here. She's in this town. She was in your diner last night. And somebody, probably that man, who works for her, is trying to preemptively make you look like something you're not. And you're sitting here making coffee. It's a diner, Darnell. I'll make coffee. You could call someone. You could make a statement. You could tell one person the truth and let that person. No. Flat. Quick." Darnell sat back. "No," Everett said again. Quieter this time. "If I go out there and say something to protect myself, I'm making it about me. And it was never about me." Darnell rubbed his face with both hands. Slowly, the way a man rubs his face when he's trying to find a different door in a room that seems to have only one. "Renee would have told you to say something," he said. Everett's jaw moved, just slightly. "Renee," he said, "would have handled it herself and not told me until it was done." Darnell almost smiled. "Almost. Fair," he said. "That's fair." They sat with their coffee for a moment. The diner was quiet. Beverly had gone upstairs on her break. The 2 remaining tables were a man reading a newspaper and an older woman working on a crossword, neither of whom was paying any attention to the counter. Darnell said, "What do you want to happen?" Everett turned his mug in his hands. Slowly, thinking about the question seriously, because Darnell had asked it seriously, and that was the least it deserved. "I want her to leave Caldwell feeling like she found what she came for," he said, "without it becoming something else." Something else meaning what? Meaning a story, meaning a campaign, meaning something she has to carry around and talk about and manage. Darnell looked at him. "You know, she's already talking about it," he said. "She mentioned it last night at the gala. Not your name, just the story. The letters, the fund, EW. I have a friend who was in the room." He paused. "She stopped the prepared remarks and talked about you for 10 minutes to 400 people. Everett was quiet. "She doesn't know it was you," Darnell said, "but she talked about you for 10 minutes. To 400 people, without knowing your name." He let that sit. "What does that tell you?" Everett didn't answer, because the answer was doing something uncomfortable inside his chest, and he didn't particularly want to look at it directly. Darnell finished his coffee. He set the mug down. "The post is getting shared," he said. "By tonight, it won't be just the community group." He stood, pulled on his jacket. "I'm not telling you to do anything. I know better than that. I'm just telling you what's coming, so you can decide what to do when it gets here." He put a 20 on the counter. "That's for the coffee and whatever Beverly wants for lunch." Everett said, "That's too much. It's always too much, and you always accept it, and we both know why." He left. The bell rang. Everett stood behind the counter and looked at the street through the front window. A woman walked by, with an umbrella she didn't need yet. A kid on a bike took the corner too fast and corrected without wiping out. A truck pulled into the gas station across the way. Small town Saturday, happening the way it always happened, except this Saturday had Roland Okafor's check in it, and a post with 53 comments, and Darnell driving 2.5 hours on no notice. And somewhere in this town, in a hotel room, or a conference room, or the back of a car, there was a woman in a red dress who had been looking for him for 7 years and didn't know she'd already found him. He went back to the kitchen. He had lunch prep to start. Camille had been in the hotel since 9 in the morning, not sleeping, working. The kind of working she did when something was sitting at the edge of her mind and she needed to outrun it. Emails, calls with her team in Atlanta, a 30-minute review of the gala's community outreach numbers from the night before. Roland had knocked on her door at 10:15. She had not answered. He had sent a text. We should debrief before the afternoon session. She had replied, give me an hour. At 10:45, she was on the phone with her director of operations and also looking at her laptop screen, where a browser tab had been open since 8 in the morning. Wade's Corner, Caldwell, Georgia. Business registered 1987. Current proprietor, Everett Jerome Wade. She found it in 7 minutes. Not 7 years. 7 minutes. Which raised the question she was not ready to sit inside. Had she not found it before because it wasn't findable? Or because she hadn't looked in the right place? Or because some part of her had needed the searching to be the thing and hadn't been ready for the finding? She didn't answer that question. She closed the tab. She got dressed. Different today. No gala requirement today. She wore a wrap dress in deep burgundy, fitted at the waist, hem just above the knee. Low block heels. Hair still up, same as yesterday because the bun was armor and she still needed it. She went down to the conference room for the afternoon session, smiled at the right people, said the right things, answered questions about Reeve's expansion plans for rural Georgia with the practiced fluency of a woman who has given the same answer in 14 different ways and can do it again. Roland found her at the break. He said, we need to talk. She said, you've been saying that since last night. This is different. She looked at him. Something in his face was different. Not the controlled different he performed for meetings. Actually different. She said, my room. 10 minutes. He came. He sat in the chair by the window, which was not his usual move. Roland preferred to stand in rooms because standing gave him optionality. Sitting in a chair meant he decided to stay. He told her about the post. She listened. She didn't interrupt. When he finished, she said, you know who made the post? Not a question. Roland said nothing. She said, Roland. He said, I was protecting the narrative. She said, whose narrative? He said, yours. She looked at him. Camille Reeves had a particular look she reserved for moments when she had heard something so precisely wrong that she needed a second to let it finish settling before she responded. It was not an angry look. It was quieter than angry. It was the look of a woman recalculating something she thought she already understood. She said, what did you do before the post? Roland looked at the window. Hold on. I went to see him this morning. She waited. I offered him a settlement. The room went very still. You offered him money, she said, to stay away from me, to stay away from the story. I am the story. The campaign is the story. You are the face of the... Do not finish that sentence. He didn't. She stood up. She walked to the window, stood beside him, looked out at Caldwell. At the traffic light on 5th. The barber shop. The kids on bikes. A small town doing what small towns do on Saturday afternoon, when nobody is paying attention to it. He took it, she said. No. She turned to look at him. He turned it down, Roland said. He sounded almost reluctant to admit it, like it didn't fit into a framework he was comfortable with and the discomfort was audible. Camille said nothing for a long time. She picked up her bag. She put on her coat. Roland said, where are you going? She said, to do what you should have let me do last night. Camille, the afternoon session can wait 45 minutes. She stopped at the door. Take the post down. However you need to handle it. Handle it. And Roland. She looked at him with the full attention she usually reserved for board members, who had said something she was going to remember. Don't manage me again. She left. The drive to Wade's Corner took 4 minutes. She didn't call ahead. There was no number to call. There was a diner on the corner of Reed and Fifth, and it was either open or it wasn't. It was open. The lunch crowd was thinning. 2 tables occupied. Beverly at her corner spot, back to the knitting. Everett at the counter, doing the end-of-lunch accounting in a small spiral notebook, the kind that cost 99 cents and came 3 to a pack. He looked up when the bell rang. She was alone this time. No Roland. No driver standing by. Just Camille Reeves in a burgundy wrap dress and low heels, hair still in its bun, walking toward the counter with the specific purpose of a woman who has decided something and is not going undecided. She sat on the stool at the end of the counter, the same stool Roland had sat in that morning. Everett closed the notebook. He didn't say anything. She said, I know Roland came here this morning. Everett said, I figured you didn't. I didn't. She set her bag on the counter. I'm sorry. He looked at her. Something moved in his expression. That was not quite surprise. More like a recalibration. People in his experience apologized for things they'd done or things they'd said. She was apologizing for something someone else had done in her name. That was a different category. You didn't do it, he said. He works for me. He made a choice. People who work for you make their own choices. She looked at him. Are you always this reasonable? No, he said. I'm just tired and it's easier. Which was the most honest thing she'd heard in a room in longer than she wanted to admit. She said, I want to ask you something directly. He waited. Are you EW? The diner held still. Beverly's needles stopped. The man at table 1 turned a page of his newspaper. Loudly. Then everything was quiet again. Everett looked at Camille for a long moment. And the look was complicated. Not guilty. Not relieved. Not even reluctant. It was the look of a man who had been holding something carefully for a very long time. And someone had just asked him to set it down, and he was figuring out if his hands remembered how. He stood up. He went to the kitchen. She stayed on the stool. She did not call after him. She did not pull out her phone. She sat with her hands in her lap, and the low hum of the pie case, and Beverly's resumed knitting and waited. He came back. He set a stack of papers on the counter. Envelopes, bundled with a rubber band worn thin. Receipts folded in thirds. A small spiral notebook, older than the one he'd been using for the accounts. The cover soft and bent at the corner. She looked at the stack. She looked at him. He said, the notebook is the dates and amounts. In order. Renee started it. I kept it going after. His voice was level. The receipts are the actual deposits. The fund changed names twice. There's a gap in 2018 because the processing organization had a transition, but the giving didn't stop. I've got the bank records if it matters. She didn't move. He said, it matters to you or not. The accounting is clean. It's not about the accounting. I know, he said. I'm telling you anyway, because you deserve to see the whole thing. She reached out. Slowly. She put her hand on the stack of papers. Didn't take anything. Just touched it. The way you touch something you've been looking for so long that, when you find it, the first instinct is not to open it, but to make sure it's real. She said, why? He looked at her. Why what? Why did you do it? Why did you keep doing it? Why didn't you ever put a name on it? He was quiet for a moment. Not avoiding. Thinking about how to say it the right way. Renee saw the listing in a community newsletter, he said. A scholarship fund looking for small donors. Students who needed support. She thought we could spare something every month, even if it was small. So we started. He looked at the notebook. She wrote the first letter. The one that said, keep reading. That was her. He paused. She said if you're going to give something to someone, you give it whole. No strings. No name on it. Because once you put your name on it, it's not a gift anymore. It's a transaction. Camille's breath was very quiet. She passed, he said. It was not a question, but he said it like he was offering her information she hadn't specifically asked for, because she might need it to understand the rest. 4 years ago, and I kept mailing. Because. He stopped, looked at the counter. Because it was the thing we did together. And it was the last thing we were still doing together. And I didn't know how to stop. She was looking at him. Not the way she looked at contributors, or board members, or the people she met at events who wanted 5 minutes of her time. She was looking at him the way you look at someone when you understand, not abstractly, but actually, that they're the reason something in your life turned out the way it did. Her eyes were bright. She did not look away. He said, November 2019. Last contribution. He said it without looking at the stack because he knew it without looking. Renee passed in October. The amount was larger than usual. I sold the truck to cover it. She had said the year before she wanted to do something bigger. Mark a year. He exhaled. I was doing it for her. Camille put a hand over her mouth. Not dramatically, just quietly, the way you cover your mouth when a feeling arrives that your face wasn't prepared for. Beverly Wade had stopped knitting entirely. She was looking at her son across the room with an expression that was not readable the way most expressions are readable, because it was too many things at once. Pride and grief, and 23 years of Saturday mornings watching him count money at the kitchen table. The man at table 1 had given up pretending to read the paper. The woman at table 2 was looking out the window very deliberately. Camille took her hand away from her mouth. She said the line in the letter, "Keep reading. The world will need what you see." She looked at him. I've said that to myself more times than I can count. Every time something was hard. Every time I wanted to stop. She paused. Your wife wrote that. She did. She wrote it to a person she'd never met. She wrote it to the idea of a person. The person who needed to hear it. Camille sat with that for a moment. She said, she was right. Everett said, she usually was. It was not said with bitterness. It was said with the particular tenderness of a man who has made peace with something he will never fully make peace with. Camille looked down at the stack of papers. She looked at the worn rubber band, the soft corner of the notebook. 23 years of months, 23 years of amounts, some of them so small she could feel the cost of them through the paper. She said, I came here to find you, and now I don't know what to do with it. He said, you don't have to do anything with it. That's not, she stopped. You did all of this. For 23 years, and you never asked for anything. I wasn't expecting anything. That's not the same as not deserving it. He looked at her. She looked at him. Somewhere on her phone, which was in her bag on the counter, a notification buzzed. Then another. Then 3 more in quick succession. She didn't look at it. She said, can I come back tonight? He said, diner closes at 9. She said, I'll be here at 8. She stood. She picked up her bag. She looked at the stack of papers on the counter, and then at him. She said, leave those out. She left. The bell rang. Everett stood at the counter for a long moment. Beverly said from her corner, without looking up from her knitting, you know this is not going to stay small. Everett picked up the rubber-banded stack. He held it for a moment. Then he set it beside the register where he could see it. I know, he said, and you're okay with that. He thought about Renee, about the newsletter she'd brought home in 2001, folded open to the page with a listing, about the way she'd sat on the kitchen table and said, I think we should do this. About the first check they'd written together, $12, which was what they had after the month's expenses, and the way she'd sealed the envelope with her thumb and said there like it was done and it was good, and that was all there was to say. I'm okay with it, he said. Beverly nodded. Her needles started again. Outside, the afternoon was going silver. The clouds had made their decision. Rain was coming after all. It was just a matter of when. Everett went to the window and turned the sign to close for a few hours. He had prep to do before tonight. The grill needed cleaning. The walk-in needed restocking. The schedule for next week needed to be written. And at 8 o'clock, someone was coming back. He didn't know what happened after that, but he knew what Renee would have said. She would have said set an extra mug out. Don't make people ask for the thing you can just give them. So he went to the cabinet. He set out an extra mug, and he got to work. 8 o'clock came the way important things come. Without announcement, without build-up, just the clock moving forward the way it always does, indifferent to what you've placed on either side of it. Everett had closed the diner at 5. He did the deep clean himself, not because it needed doing that thoroughly on a Saturday night, because his hands needed something honest to do, and the grill didn't argue back. He scrubbed the flat top until it reflected the overhead light back at him. He mopped the floor twice. He wiped every table, even the ones no one had sat all day. Beverly came downstairs at 6 and stood in the doorway watching him wipe the counter for the third time. She said, "You're nervous." He said, "I'm cleaning." She said, "I know what I said." She made him eat something, grits and a fried egg, standing over the kitchen sink because neither of them felt like sitting at a table with a whole empty diner around them. Beverly talked about her friend Norma, whose car had broken down on the interstate last Tuesday, and how Norma treated emergencies like personal insults from the universe. Everett laughed once. That was the goal, and Beverly knew it. She went back upstairs at 7:15. At the door to the kitchen stairs, she stopped. She said, "Everett." He looked at her. She said, "Your daddy used to say a man who gives without signing his name is making an argument about who he is without saying a word." She held a railing. "I think you won that argument a long time ago. Tonight is just somebody else finding out." She went upstairs. He stood in the quiet kitchen for a moment. Just stood there. Then he turned the lights on in the dining room and unlocked the front door at 7:55. He didn't flip the sign to open. He left it on closed, but the door was unlocked. Because Renee had always said there was a difference between a locked door and a door that was just not yet opened, and a person paying attention wouldn't know which one they were standing in front of. At 8:03 the bell rang. Camille came in alone. Different dress. Deep green tonight, fitted at the waist, hem just above the knee. Low block heels, not the stilettos from last night. Her hair was up, same as always, but looser at the temples now, a few strands free, like she'd stopped negotiating with him somewhere between the hotel and here. She carried the leather portfolio under one arm. The good one, not the everyday bag. This was the one she brought to things that mattered. She stopped just inside the door. The diner was empty except for the yellow light, and 2 mugs already on the counter. She looked at the mugs. She looked at him. She sat down. He poured coffee without asking, set 1 mug in front of her, kept 1 for himself. He didn't go behind the counter. He sat on the stool beside her, 1 stool of distance between them, and neither of them said anything right away, because sometimes the right way to begin something is to give it room first. She said, "I had a conversation with Roland this afternoon. He said, how'd that go?" She said, "He still has his job, but he understands some things differently now." Everett said, "That's fair." She looked at him sideways. "Is it?" He thought about it, genuinely. A man who does something wrong, trying to protect someone he believes in, isn't the same as a man who does wrong for sport. He gets a second chance. He uses it or he doesn't. She was quiet for a moment. You know, that's more generous than most people would manage. Most people haven't needed someone to be generous with them. She held her mug in both hands and didn't say anything to that. Not because she had nothing to say, because it landed somewhere that needed a second. Then she opened the portfolio. Inside was a printed article. Georgia Business Journal, 3 years back. She set on the counter between them. Reeves Ed expands reach to rural communities. Third paragraph. A $400,000 grant distributed across 7 rural Georgia counties for adult education and vocational certification. 1 county listed, Caldwell County. Everett read it slowly, the way he read anything worth reading. She said, "I didn't know you were in Caldwell when I set up that grant. I didn't know this town existed when I set up that grant." She looked at the page. Your county received $62,000 3 years ago for an adult continuing education program. Last year, a man named Theodore Briggs finished that program, got his HVAC certification, and opened a business on Maple Street. Everett looked up. She said, "You know him." "Teddy." He said the name quietly. His mother came in every Sunday morning for 12 years. He told the grant coordinator that the program was the first time anyone had treated him like the investment was worth making. She folded her hands on the counter. "The coordinator told me because I always ask. I ask what people say when nobody official is listening." She looked at Everett. "You gave to a fund that helped me see. I funded a program that helped a man in your town build his life. Neither of us planned it. Neither of us knew." She paused. "But it's a circle." Everett looked at the article. He thought about Teddy Briggs at the counter every Sunday morning since he was old enough to sit up straight on the stool. He thought about Teddy's mother saying he's going to figure out, with the tired certainty of a woman who has been saying that longer than she expected to have to keep saying it. He said she would have loved knowing that. Camille said, Renee? She believed in circles. She used to say kindness is too big to stay in one place. It finds where it needs to go. He picked up his mug. I thought that was just the way she talked. Camille said maybe she was right. He looked at her then, and she was looking back at him in a way that was not the way she had looked at him last night or this afternoon. Last night, she had looked at him like a question she was trying to answer. This afternoon, like a fact she was trying to absorb. Now she looked at him like someone she had decided something about and was done reconsidering. He said, you want to do something, not a question. She said, is it that obvious? You brought the good portfolio. She smiled, not the event smile, the real one, the one that started at the corner of her mouth and moved slower than a smile usually does, like it had more distance to cover. I want to establish a fund, formal and permanent, an education support fund for adults in this county, people working toward something and needing help with the cost of getting there. Not a scholarship program with a ceremony attached. Just a fund that operates. She paused. I want to name it after Renee. Everett went very still. The Renee Wade Education Fund, she said, administered locally. The people making decisions about who gets help should be people who know this place and know what it costs to live here. My foundation provides the capital. No press strategy around it. No campaign. No naming rights for donors. She held his gaze. You can say no. You can tell me to build it differently. But I want to do something that carries her forward. Because she started this, and she didn't get to see where it went. The yellow light above the counter hummed. Outside, a car moved slow on Reed Street. The traffic light changed for nobody. Everett was working through something. She could see it. She waited because the thing being worked through was worth the wait, and she had learned, in the last 24 hours, that this was a man who needed a moment to say things right, and that the moment was always worth giving him. He said she'd want it to be useful, not ceremonial. That's how I'd build it. She'd want the people running it to be from here. I'd insist on it. She'd want to go to people who'd already been told no. Not as charity, as a correction. Yes. He looked up at her. He said, then yes. Quiet yes. The kind that has been waiting inside a person for a while and just needed the right door. She exhaled once. Then she picked up her pen, and they got to work. The structure first, then the governance, then the criteria for who qualified and how the process would work, and what the application would ask and what it wouldn't. She asked questions, and he answered with the precision of a man who had been thinking about what his community needed for years, without expecting anyone to ask. She wrote in the margins of the portfolio pages. He made a second pot of coffee at 9:10, without either of them noting that the diner had been technically closed for over an hour. At 9:45, she set her pen down. She said, can I ask you something personal? He said, you can ask. November 2019. After Renee. She held her mug in both hands. You sold your truck. Needed to. You needed the truck. I needed to keep the promise more. He said it the way you say a thing that's true and settled and doesn't require defense. Renee wanted to do something larger that year. We talked about it. She got sick before she could follow through. He was quiet for a moment. I did it for her. Camille said, in the week after she died. Yes. She looked at him steadily. He looked at the counter. She said, I don't have words for that. You don't need to. Everett. He looked up. She said, you are the most decent person I have ever sat across from. And I have sat across from a great many people. He said, that's a low bar if most of them were donors at gala tables. She laughed, sudden and real, breaking through whatever she had been holding together, and she didn't try to stop it or shape it into something more appropriate. It just came out. He smiled, not a performance of one, just the real thing moving across his face. They stayed like that for a moment. Two people in a closed diner on a Saturday night in a town most people drove through without slowing, and neither one of them needed to be anywhere else. Sunday morning arrived clear. The gray had burned off overnight. Caldwell was sharp and bright, the kind of morning that makes small towns look like someone put effort into them. The traffic light on Fifth Cycling threw its colors in the early quiet. The barber shop still dark. The gas station already moving. Wade's Corner opened at 7. Of course it did. The closing reception for the Reeves Ed weekend was scheduled for 11 at the hotel ballroom, smaller than the gala. Round tables, coffee service, natural light through the east windows. About 90 people, local officials, community partners, educators, the donors who had stayed the full weekend. Roland had built the program carefully. The expansion initiative announcement was the centerpiece. A video, 4.5 minutes, 3 months of production. Recognition of local partners. Camille's remarks, 10 minutes, tight and purposeful. She was going to change what she said, not the initiative. The initiative was real, and it deserved its moment. But the remarks were going to be different from what was on Roland's tablet. She had called him at 7 in the morning. He answered fast, which meant he was already awake and already waiting for this. She said, "I need 20 minutes instead of 10. Silence. Hold on." He said, "What are you going to say?" She said, "What's true?" A pause that lasted longer than a logistics question would require. He said, "I'll adjust the program." She said, "Thank you." She hung up. She stood at the hotel window, looking out at Caldwell, at the traffic light, at Wade's Corner, its lights already on at 6:50. She stood there long enough to finish her coffee and think about what she was going to say and decide that she wasn't going to plan it sentence by sentence. She was going to say what happened. She was good at saying what happened. That was the whole skill of her when she let herself use it without the polish around it. Roland met her at the ballroom door at 10:50. He looked like a man who had made a decision about something and was still living in the first hour of it, not yet sure if it fit. He handed her the revised timing sheet. She said, "Is he here?" Roland said, "Beverly called me at 6:30 this morning." He adjusted his jacket, a small automatic gesture. She said she'd get him here. I told her the side entrance was less crowded. He looked at the program in his hands. "I was wrong yesterday. Both things I did, the post and the check." He said it, without softening it or building a case around it. I treated him like a problem to contain, and he wasn't one. I'd like to say it won't happen again. Camille looked at him. He said, "It won't happen again." She said, "I know." She went inside. The reception moved through its first portion the way these things do. Coffee and conversation. A round of recognition for local partners that was genuine on both sides. The video played, and the room watched it with the attention of people who had come to be convinced of something and were finding they didn't need convincing. Roland at the podium, introducing her with the ease of a man who had done this hundreds of times and meant it this time more than most. She walked to the podium. She looked out at the room. Near the back, by the door that opened onto the east corridor, Beverly Wade sat in a folding chair with her bag on her lap and her back straight. Beside her, in the aisle chair, Everett sat in a white dress shirt with the top button open. No yakit. Beverly had told him to come, as himself, and he had. He was looking at the table in front of him when she found him. Then he looked up. 1 second. Just one. She looked back at the room. She said, "I want to tell you about a letter." Not in the prepared remarks. Roland didn't move from his spot near the east wall. She said, 23 years ago, I was a 20-year-old woman who could not see properly and could not afford to fix it. The words on a page swam when I looked at them. I've been managing this for 2 years. I had systems. I held the page at a certain angle. I sat in certain light. I told myself it was manageable because I didn't know what came after admitting it wasn't. The room was quiet in a way rooms rarely get quiet when 90 people are sitting in them. She said, someone I had never met paid for a surgery and paid for a semester of school and sent me a letter, 6 sentences, and a note at the bottom that said, "Keep reading. The world will need what you see." She stopped. I have said that to myself more times than I can count. In parking lots, on planes, in rooms where I was the only person who looked like me, and I needed to remember why I was there. She paused. I said it to a woman on my team 4 years ago who was about to quit. She didn't quit. She runs our Southeast division now. Another pause. For 23 years, I didn't know who wrote it. She looked toward the back of the room. 90 people turned with her. Everett was looking at the table again. Not performing humility, just genuinely somewhere else for a moment, somewhere private. And she recognized it because she had watched him do it twice now, when something landed close to the center of him. She said, his name is Everett Wade. He runs the diner on Reed and Fifth, and I will tell you the cornbread is worth a drive from wherever you came from. He started contributing to an education fund 23 years ago because his wife, Renee, believed in it, and he believed in her. He kept contributing for 19 more years after she passed, including in the week he buried her. Someone near the front made a sound low in their throat. She said, he never put his name on it. He never told anyone. When someone offered him money to stay quiet and stay away, he pushed it back across the counter without explaining himself. She let that sit. He did not come today to be recognized. But he's here, and I'm not going to stand at this podium and talk about what education means to a community without saying the name of the man in this room who has been living that answer for 2 decades. She stepped back from the podium. The room didn't respond immediately, because some things don't ask for applause right away. Some things ask for a breath, a moment to let it move through you before you react to it. Then from somewhere in the middle of the room, someone stood. Then 3 more people. Then the room came up slowly, unevenly, the way it does when people are rising because they mean it and not because they're following a cue. Everett did not stand. He sat in the back row with his hands on the table in front of him and his eyes doing the thing they did when he was holding something carefully. Beverly reached over and put her hand on top of his. She didn't say anything. She didn't need to. Roland stood near the east wall. He watched Everett sitting in the back of the room while the room stood around him, and something crossed his face that he didn't try to manage. He had spent 9 years managing Camille's public moments. He had never once seen a moment he couldn't find the angle on. He couldn't find the angle on this. He left it alone. The applause kept going. Camille came down from the stage. She moved through the room, and people stepped aside, not to make a path for her rank or her reputation, just the natural movement of people who understand that something is happening and they don't want to interrupt it. She reached the back row. Everett stood because that's what you do. They faced each other. She said, I didn't ask your permission. He said, no, you didn't. Are you angry? He considered it for real, the way he considered things. No. He glanced up at the ceiling briefly, just briefly. She would have been insufferable about this for weeks. Camille said, she sounds wonderful. He said she was 2 words, but the weight in them was the weight of 4 years and 19 years before that and a promise kept through all of it. Beverly looked between them with the expression of a woman who has waited a long time for something to happen and is prepared to wait a little longer without rushing it. She said, I want cornbread. Everett said, Mama, we're in a hotel ballroom. Beverly said, I'm aware of the location. Camille said, Thursday, corner table. I'll make sure it's ready. Beverly said, good, with the finality of someone closing a matter that has been open too long. The reception wound down through the next hour. People found Everett in small groups, said things that were genuine, said things that were polished, said things that were both at once. He received all of it, with the ease of a man who never confused the attention for something it wasn't. Darnell had texted during the remarks. Beverly had shown him the live video on her phone, and his message said only, told you, which was enough, which was exactly enough. At 12:40, the ballroom had mostly cleared. Camille and Everett stood by the window on the east wall, Caldwell in the Sunday noon light below them, unhurried, doing what it did. She said, Can I ask you one more thing? He said, You keep asking if you're allowed to ask. She said, I keep not knowing if I've earned it yet. He said, Camille, you funded a county health initiative 4 years ago that covered Beverly's knee replacement when her insurance fell short. He looked out the window. She dances at church now. She couldn't before that surgery. Camille turned to look at him. He said, I found that out last night, thinking about circles. He looked at her. Your money. Her knee. She dances. Camille's hand came up to her mouth. He said, You didn't plan that. She said, I didn't know. He said, I know you didn't. That's exactly what I mean. She stood with her hand over her mouth and her eyes bright and didn't say anything for a moment. He said, "You can't plan where it goes. You start it and you let it move." She lowered her hand. She looked at him. She said, "Thursday." He said, "Thursday." She said, 7 o'clock. He said, "Coffee will be ready at 6:55. She said, "You make it too strong." He said, "You drink it anyway." She said, "I do." 3 months later, the Renee Wade Education Fund opened its first application cycle. 14 people applied in the first 2 weeks. The committee read every application the same way Everett had taught them to read them, which was the way Renee had taught him, which was read for the person, not the paperwork. Ask what they're moving toward. Ask what's been in the way. Ask whether the investment makes sense not by the numbers, but by the life. The committee had 5 members, all from Caldwell. Everett was one of them. He had not volunteered. Beverly had given him a look across the kitchen table when Camille mentioned it, and the look had answered the question before his mouth could. The first cohort was 14 adults. A former warehouse shift supervisor working toward a business certification. A woman who had spent 15 years raising her sister's children and never finished her own associate's degree. A man who had stayed in the same job for 11 years because the course that would move him forward cost money he didn't have and now didn't. Everett read all 14 applications before the first committee meeting. He made notes in the margin of each one. Questions mostly, things to understand about a person before deciding anything about them. Because Renee had told him that the most important thing about giving was seeing who you were giving to. Not to judge them, to see them. Because people who have been invisible for a long time need to feel seen before they can believe a door is really open. He thought about that on the drive to the first meeting. He thought about a woman in a red dress walking into a diner in the rain, pulling an envelope from a leather bag, holding it with both hands like it was the most important thing in the room. Which it was. Thursday evening settled into something that didn't need naming. Camille came at 7. The coffee was ready at 6:55. Beverly sat in her corner working on something in deep blue yarn that she declined to explain. The corner table was the corner table, not by announcement, just by the fact that it was where Camille sat and where the extra mug was and where the conversation happened. That didn't happen anywhere else. They talked about the fund, about the first cohort, about the man who had cried at the orientation, just for a moment before straightening up and taking his folder like he was done with a part of his life where he doubted himself. They talked about Caldwell, about the bulletin board the gas station owner had put up out front, now covered in notices and flyers and one drawing of a dog that a child had contributed and nobody had taken down. They talked about Renee sometimes, not every week, but when something happened that Everett thought she would have had something to say about, he said it. Camille listened the way you listen to something that matters to the person saying it, which is the only way worth listening. One Thursday in late spring, Camille sat down and said, "I'm going to be in Atlanta most of next month. I'll miss some Thursdays." He said, "Table be here." She said, "You make it very hard to worry about things." He said, "Things mostly sort out." She said, "You believe that." He said, "I believe doing the right thing is the right thing whether or not everything sorts out. The sorting out is a bonus." Beverly, without looking up from her knitting, said, "Renee told me that at their wedding. She said Everett thinks goodness is supposed to pay off immediately, and I'm working on him." She turned her needles. I told her good luck. She said she didn't need luck. She had patience. Everett looked at his mother. Beverly kept knitting. Camille laughed. He smiled. Outside, Reed Street moved through its Thursday evening. The traffic light. A truck pulling in at the gas station. 2 people walking the sidewalk on the other side, not in a hurry, talking about something that made one of them gesture with both hands. Small town, Thursday. On the wall near the entrance, beside the business license and the laminated hours card, Beverly had hung a small frame one Wednesday morning, without telling Everett, until it was already up. He had read it and been quiet for a long time. Then he had said, "Mama." She had said, $2 at Norma's sale. The frame, not the words. He had said, "Where did the words come from?" She had said, "I've been carrying them for 23 years. Seemed like time to put them somewhere." The note said, "Some people don't change the world by standing above it. They change it by showing up, by giving what they have, by keeping a promise when no one is watching. The coffee's always ready. The door's not locked. Sit down." Beneath it, in different ink, someone had added 4 words. Renee Wade started this. And for Caldwell, Georgia, that was enough.